Thanks for being our audience. We're delighted to have you here today. Welcome to Impact Days at UMS and Youth on Record. We are here with a fabulous panel today, and I would like to ask everyone to take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself so that our audience, both live and visual, or virtual, knows who you are. So, you want to start, Hunky?
Start on the far end, yes.
Terrific.
Thank you, Kate. And you're going to introduce yourself, right? Kate's awesome.
I will at the end,
Okay,
yeah.
awesome. Hakeem Bellamy, bringing you greetings from Albuquerque, New Mexico, your sister city just down the highway. Long time relationship with Denver over the years, particularly with the work of Youth on Record, because of the work that I do in Albuquerque in trying to help develop young artists. And I don't know anything that I've done in my career that makes me an expert on that. Growing up in the Philadelphia or South Jersey area, art wasn't my first option. Not my parents' first option, it wasn't mine, but I think that when it calls you, when you know it's what you're supposed to do, you eventually find it. So I didn't find myself as an artist until I moved to Albuquerque, and by the time I did that, I was 26. And in short order, I was on a National Poetry Slam champion team that won the National Poetry Slam. 6 months later, we won the College National Poetry Slam, and my introduction to being a professional artist was born from that touring that came with that title. And have continued to do performance art, performance poetry, songwriting, copywriting and copy editing for videos, for retail and commercial, anything that pretty much involves picking up a pen, I do. In 2012, I was named the Poet Laureate for the city of Albuquerque, the first. We just named our sixth. It's a 2-year term, and so over a decade of doing that kind of work as an artist in my city, and then I just stepped down from being the deputy director for the Department of Arts and Culture for our city, which also happens to be the department that houses the Poet Laureate program. So full circle from artist to bureaucrat, and I'm happy to be here today.
Hi, my name is Demi. I'm Demi Harvey, and I work for ND 1023, which is under the umbrella of Colorado Public Radio. I am a host and a digital editor, and I have multiple shows on ND 1023, but I also host a queer-focused show that's called Serve It, and it is amazing. It showcases a bunch of LGBTQ plus artists, which is like near and dear to my heart. And yeah, I have about 10 years of music experience here in Denver and across Colorado. I love collaboration. I think that that's like one of my favorite things about the music industry is just like how collaborative we can be across like all different sectors. It's really just super exciting. It keeps things fresh and fun. And so I'm always thinking of innovative ways to collaborate with artists and with different people across different industries. That's also part of my job at ND 1023. And I just love our music community so much. So anything that I can do to support artists and to support nonprofits and all that kind of stuff is in my wheelhouse. So that's why I'm here. Yay.
I'm Garrett Ammon, and I'm the artistic director of Wonderbound, a contemporary ballet company here in Denver. And I moved to Denver in 2007 and immediately fell in love with the art scene here. My first collaborations, looking back, were just a year in, collaborating with Lighthouse Writers Workshop, 3 poets on a program, and then that same year with Curious Theater Company, choreographing their Sarah Roll's Eurydice. And then from there just spiraled into all kinds of projects over the years. I completely lost count of how many collaborations we've done. We became Wonderbound. We were Ballet Nouveau Colorado, and we became Wonderbound in 2013. In 2012, we had transitioned to all live music for all of our shows. We were very proud of that. We did that all the way until the pandemic hit. And so now we're finally getting back rolling. We're gonna finally have our first live music show again in March. So that'll be with Clay Rose and the Gasoline Lollipops to bring back the Sand Band, which we created right before the pandemic. And yeah, so that's what brings me here is all of that work that we've done.
And I'm Kevin Smith. I'm the CEO of Denver Film. So we do the Denver Film Festival. We own the C Film Center over on Colfax. We do Film on the Rocks up at Red Rocks, a number of other festivals throughout the year. We're always collaborating, especially with artists. We do a number, obviously, music is such a huge part of the film world and film space. So we do a lot of collaborations throughout the year. In a previous life, I'm from Detroit originally, so I started my career in film production completely on accident. Ended up owning my own social media agency where we actually represented a number of music festivals and other live events and other kind of major corporations during that time. So a lot of experience in working with artists of all different kinds of backgrounds. So very excited to be here today.
Excellent. Thank you all so very much. And my name is Kate Becker, and I'm here from Seattle, Washington. Happy to be here with you all. I'm a longtime fan of Youth on Record and Jamie Duffy, but I've never been to UMS before this, so this is exciting. Most of my career I spent working with young people and starting all ages venues, started the old Firehouse, nearly 30 years old, outside of Seattle, and the Vera Project, which I co-founded, is celebrating its 20-year anniversary right now. Those were hard-won battles along the way, and I had to testify in front of political leaders many times trying to get them to embrace young people and music in our city. And somewhere along the way, they must have thought I made sense because I later got appointed to lead the City of Seattle Office of Film and Music, and I now work for the county executive leading the Creative Economy and Recovery Initiative in King County, which is a very large county, larger than 12 states in the country. So. But I have a music-loving boss who loves live music more than he loves anything else, even though he's an esteemed and established politician. So it makes my work quite great to have that political leadership right now as we're trying to move things forward. So collaborate with lots of folks along the way, and really want to ask our panelists here to tell us about a great collaboration that you have worked on. Any one of you can start with this and just pick a collaboration that has been a really effective and joyous collaboration for you. Anyone? Gary?
Okay, I'll go first. I typically like to say my favorite collaboration is the next one I'm working on.
Nice.
And with that, I will say working on not only the bringing back the Sandman with Gasoline Lollipops, but developing a new project with Clay Rose, and then also working on a new collaboration with the Colorado Symphony. So those are, I can't speak more about those yet, but gosh, there have been so many amazing projects, whether it be with the Flowbots. We did a show called Divisions, which coincided with the release of their last album, and so that was an amazing project to build from start to finish with them. I think it was a really meaningful project for a lot of people. Another project, I'll go back to the Sandman, which premiered in February with Gasoline Lollipops. Clay and I are kind of like long lost brothers, so that's kind of an amazing thing to find somebody who kind of enters into the world with their utterly different life experiences, but also like a natural connection around kind of worldview that just kind of inspires and rolls into possibility. So that's always kind of what I'm looking for with collaborations, is when it feels really natural and feels really unforced and really open. Yeah.
I could go. I'm definitely going to say it's UMS. UMS, we've been collaborating with Colorado Public Radio and Indy for years, even when I worked for UMS like several years ago. And UMS, I think, is like the ultimate collaboration. It's kind of like a glutton for punishment as well, because it's just there's so much going on. There's so much collaboration happening within the artists, within the organizations. Like Youth on Record is now part of UMS, like as an integral, like I think they like co-own it together now. So it's like there's just so much going on in UMS, and one of my favorite collaborations within UMS is we are producing these like sessions essentially, which are like interviews and performances, but it's a collaboration with Goodwill and UMS because Goodwill is like welcoming us into their space, and like we're taking over like the racks and some of the display areas to like do these performances, and it's just gonna be weird and fun, and like I think that that's one of my favorite things about collaborations is like getting a lot of different ideas in the room and seeing just like how things can click and how you can get people engaged and excited. And UMS has always felt that way to me. It's always been very fresh. It's always been changing every single year. They've always been so open to new ideas, and that's like my favorite thing about collaboration because you learn and grow so much as a person and as like a person within your industry as well when you collaborate with people. And yeah, it's just really exciting to work with UMS because you never know what's going to happen, and I feel like they're just so accommodating as well. It's like, okay, this one hiccup has happened. How about we try this thing? Like, it's just so fun and creative, and I love working with UMS every single year. So, yeah, biased.
Yeah, go for it. Okay. So here's my favorite part of collaborations, especially on the creative side, is that, and musicians tend to do this intuitively. I would probably say that dancers, filmmakers as well, that the whole is so much more, the product is so much more than the sum of its parts. And so the thing is like everyone has a vision when they come together. And the resultant thing, if it's done properly, is never that one vision anyone had, their singular vision. It's always something that like, it may not meet your expectations, but it's something you realize couldn't have been done on your own, right? And so to me, that's always the beautiful part of collaboration and what it can unlock in people, what it can unlock in the community. I mean, coming from the slam community world, there's a lot of co-writing and co-authorship that happens. And so I think as a young, emerging poet finding myself on the scene, I wasn't a stranger to co-writing and the collaborative process of building an idea together. But that's still a lane. It's like we're writing, and the resultant performance piece is still very much within our control. When the stakes get bigger, the partners get bigger, it's not just the creative writers' room, it's not just the SNL sketch room anymore. It's like going to end up on the wall of a building at the city, or it's going to be some public art installation. There's more cooks in the kitchen, and it gets difficult. And sometimes, like Kay said, it ends up in city council meetings, and persuasion tends to win out, or whoever has the money tends to win out. Like their idea tends to be the one that it turns into. And I think in those situations, you have to make a decision as an artist. Is the something better than nothing? Do I walk away and take my football and go home because it's not going to be what I want it to be at the outset? And those become complicated questions, but what I've seen it do for Albuquerque, especially as a poet, and I feel like Garrett, I always say my last poem is my favorite poem, and I always think I can do better. But the last collaboration was with my son. And my son is 14, and the Isotopes, who's our AAA baseball team, came to, not me, they came to the UNM Alumni Association, because there's this moment of reckoning, y'all know, post-2020, where all the pro sports teams and university want to do something real black. And so they came to the UNM Black Alumni Association, and their president reached out to me and said, hey, Isotopes want to honor Juneteenth for the first time. They didn't do it last year, because it was still new, 200 years new. But they want to do it this year, and they would love it if you and your son, and my son he's athlete, video game guy, not poet guy, so there was arm twisting involved to get my son to play along. I was basically like, I'll write it, you just come and read the lines, and we're gonna do it, in front of, 10, 12,000 people. He's like, no. So I write it and I read it to him while, being a good dad. Like I went and got him, where do we go? Freddy's, the hamburger, shake stop. I filled him up on all his favorite stuff, sat him down, read him the poem. I was like, you think you can do it? He's like, yeah, it's not that hard, I'll do it. And at the end of the day, we did. And the Isotopes had this whole, throughout every inning, they did something to celebrate the black community. They gave free tickets to young black kids. And it was like, they would not have come up with this on their own. I definitely would have not written a Father's Day, Juneteenth, somehow baseball-related poem on my own. Like, just the assignment was like, okay. And yeah, was it perfect? No. I think it was great for me, obviously, and for my son, it was a cool bonding moment, but what it does for our community when now the pro sports team says, can we find a poet? They don't ask me, but they're having different conversations behind closed doors now with their marketing team. They're having different conversations. Oh, we're gonna do a special jersey release, you know, to honor Black history and the Black community here. And if you've ever been to Albuquerque, you know, this Black community, on a good day, we're 10% of the population. Statewide, we're 2%. Yeah, and it feels like collaboration is a space where folk will take chances they didn't take before. And yeah, if ours wasn't, in my eyes, you know, the best it could be, it will be when they do it the 3rd, 4th, or 5th time. Somebody has to start and open the door and kind of, you know, break the seal.
Love that, Hakeem.
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm always looking for, especially when it comes to film, is how do you eventize things? What's the experience that you're creating? How do you create impact? And so, again, I'm not a creative. I can help, you know, problem solve. And so one of the partnerships that I think worked out really well over the past few years is we worked with a group called Itch.io, which, you know, from the outside you would think, how does Itch.io and film go together? But you know, I look at Film on the Rocks that we do at Red Rocks and show called Classic Films, but having them come in and storm the crowd, get off the stage, you know, really make people feel like they're a part of the performance was, you know, a really awesome start. And then we had them come to another event that we did called Summer Scream, which takes place at Lakeside Amusement Park, which is a historic old amusement park with all sorts of nooks and crannies and weird stuff. So it's a perfect fit for Itch.io. And they came in with 100 performers in the middle of it and crashed the entire event, and no one knew it was happening, and it was incredible. But I think the one that I'm, you know, most proud of within this partnership has been during COVID. We both sat down and said, look, there has to be some sort of event that we can do together to give people some joy during this time. And so we worked and created a one-of-a-kind drive-in immersive experience with Itch.io and a lot of pyrotechnics, which probably weren't legal, but that's okay. And, you know, again, it was
Brought people joy, right?
Brought people joy. You know, it was 4 different weekends, 8 different shows, but, you know, being able to find that collaboration where you're thinking outside of the box, you're finding ways, again, to both solve problems, but having those conversations over a long, extended period of time, I think, is so important because you understand what their goals are, you understand their audiences, you understand really where strengths and weaknesses are. I think that's a great sign of a collaboration.
Excellent. Well, you all have referenced some key points about what makes a good collaboration, but let's talk about what makes a good collaboration and what are some red flags to look out for when you're, you know, bringing on new partners and trying to develop new ideas and new partnerships. What is it that you look for in great partnerships and collaborations? And what is it that you look out for in collaborations and developing them? So, Demi's gonna go.
Yeah, I am neurodivergent, so I have a lot of like really specific ways and how I like organize the compartments of my mind when I like start a collaboration with somebody, and so I try to be very clear on communication because I think communication is the biggest key in a collaboration. If we're not responding to emails and if we're like missing meetings and phone calls and things like that, that is literally just going to kill the collaboration because like balls get dropped and things get missed and I don't know, you can just feel that there was something that was missed along the way when the collaboration is supposed to come into fruition for an actual event or something like that. And then it just makes you not want to collaborate with that group ever again, which I think is so unfortunate. And so for me, I go into like new collaborations with a very open mind and very excited and wanting to understand a collaborator. Okay, what is your goal for this collaboration? What is my goal for this collaboration? And then from there, you know, just pinpointing like what are the things we need to get to point A to point Z, you know? And so I think collaboration thrives when there's great communication. And so for me, that's a huge component of that. So yeah, when I work with artists, especially musicians, I know collaboration is so exciting for them. It's like, oh, there's this new opportunity to do something like out of my wheelhouse or, you know, show off like a really specific talent of mine, or they thought of me for this collaboration. So like maybe I'm the tastemaker for this thing, which is really exciting, right? But when you're a musician, you have to be good at communication. And I think that that's something that's like pulling teeth for some of the musicians. It's like, hey, send me that email back so that we can get this ball rolling, you know? So what I would say is, like, if you're a musician and you're trying to get a collaboration, whether that's out of a radio station or out of another nonprofit or organization, like, show them that you're good at communication. Show them that you're in it with them, and I think that will just make it more of a fruitful collaboration.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. And I think, just to give you an example, I had a conversation recently with a former kind of partner who basically read me the riot act because 18 years ago, they didn't have the collaboration or communication that they, thought should have happened, and are still harboring those feelings. And I was like, I wasn't even in the state 18 years ago. But again, that's to your point, when you don't communicate effectively, I think that really, can make it difficult. But along the lines of communication too, I think this is a kind of a weird one, but like setting verbiage so that you're on the same page. Or like when when we're setting goals and when we're talking about how to meet expectations, are we using the same words? And do those mean the same things? I think you can really get on the wrong track to say like, our goal is revenue, our goal is impact, but what does impact mean to you? Like really diving into, what those definitions are so that you're on the same page. The other thing is I think that we're just in this world now where everything is about like now, and rapid fire. And I think just taking time. The best partnerships that I've seen really are, they don't happen overnight. It's not like, hey, we just met, we should do something tomorrow. It's like, let's talk, let's take a year. Let's spend time understanding each other's, workflow and what you're working on. And like, I'm gonna come to your events, you come to my events, and then let's see. And I think, taking the time to do that really has grown some significant partnerships for us.
Yeah, I would agree, because I want to say that collaborations take time. And a red flag is when the person who's on the other end of the collaboration is putting pressure on you, whether it's a deadline or it's like, okay, those aren't the most optimal conditions for this to come together. And you're right, because it is explorative, it is kind of emergent when you're collaborating, and when you rush it and put that pressure on it, like anybody, when pressure is high, creativity goes down, right? And so I just feel like that was, and when I was talking about the Isotopes collaboration, that's where it was like, yeah, if we had more time, it could have been better, and that's always a thing for artists and creatives. Like, if I had more time, but there's the difference between wishing you had more time and knowing you didn't have enough are two very different things, right? And just knowing that difference, I think, is huge. The other piece is that in this kind of collaborative space and working with one of the current projects I'm working on is with a solar company based in Albuquerque. They want a new, brand video, and they don't want it to be like all the other brand videos written by marketing people, so they hire a poet. And my non-negotiable to them in order to say yes was like exactly what you were saying. I want to have these weekly meetings. I need y'all to show up, because if you just want a contractor and you want me to go away and just come back with something and sell it to you, take it or leave it as is, I might not be the guy. But if you want to iterate every week and I bring you drafts and you give feedback on the drafts and then I come back with another draft, like, I feel like that's, for me, the process I would like, not just because I don't want to take your money, but at the end of the day, the thing we produce has my name on it. And I want everybody, I don't want somebody to be like, oh, it's sort of cool, but if we should have did this, it's like, we need consensus, and consensus takes time. So we'll keep at it. And yeah, to the project manager, I just told her, like, you gotta make your people available to me. And if they're not available to me, this is not gonna work, right? That's the communication piece. And so I just think that's really important.
Yes, I agree with everything that has been said so far. All of these things are just so important to make sure that things go well. One thing that I do as an artist moving into a process with other artists, first things first, do a lot of research at the front end. Get to know who it is that you're going to be sitting down and talking to. Make sure that you really like them, you really like what they're doing, that even if you have different worldviews, that you can embrace what that looks like, right? And then from there, what I do is I sit down and have a conversation without any intention for the outcome of that meeting. So ideally that's over coffee or drinks or whatever, just to get to know you, see if you enjoy being in each other's company. Because you're gonna be spending a lot of time together. So just take that time without any, don't agree, like resist the urge to be like, we're gonna do this. Sleep on it, go back to it a couple days later at least, before you decide to say we're going forward. And then I think time is really important. I look back on the journey, and fortunately now we're in a place where we're usually working a couple years out on a new project. And that time creates so much possibility, because that anxiety of, oh my gosh, this is happening now, it puts so much pressure on everybody. And then when that, you know, the worst sides of us come out when we're all under pressure, right? And so creating that space, there's a lot of problems that can be solved. And then the other thing that I'm gonna say is it's really important that everybody be really honest with themselves about what they need to be happy on the other side. That's not only from a creative, an artistic standpoint of what you're creating together, but that you have to be honest about what you need. Wonderbound is a small to medium-sized organization as a nonprofit, depending on whose scale you're using. We work with bands and organizations that are much smaller than us. We also work with organizations like the Colorado Symphony that are so much bigger than us. Those financial aspects of that are incredibly different. And size also doesn't necessarily mean that there's more money available. It's just that it's spread around in different ways. But if you go in, I always say don't ever agree to do something for less than that amount that you can be certain that you're not going to resent it at the other end. Because if you end up in a place of resentfulness, then you can't be productive in your creativity.
Can I add to that as well? With everything that we've all said, I think one big thing that also jumped out to me that like can be a red flag is just not knowing the organization that you want to collaborate with. I think that you mentioned that before. It's just like you really have to go into a collaboration and want to get to know who is all going to be involved. I think like one of my biggest red flags is when someone comes to me and they're like, oh, what do you guys do? What? Like, what? You could have just did a Google on the webpage. It just blows my mind when that kind of stuff happens. And so I think it needs to be both ways. You need to understand like who you're going to be working with and what they want out of everything. Because especially I noticed in my 20s that I wanted to work with everyone. I wanted to do every single thing. And I hopped into some things like way too soon before I knew what I was getting into because I didn't understand the organization or I didn't understand all of the nuances that came with that kind of collaboration. So I think just being really clear, that communication part that I talked about before, but also really getting to know who you're working with is just so integral because yeah, you could end up just being disappointed by the outcome or wasting time because you didn't understand like, oh, I ended up booking this band for this specific thing, but that wasn't really the vibe I was going for. But it's like, did you listen to their music before, you know? So it's like basic things like that. Just do your research. Information is just so important in a collaboration as well.
Can I add to that as well? That piece about that relationship building that we all touched on is huge. Because it creates a dynamic of trust, right? And so I know working with this solar company, I think they took them 2 meetings to realize that they weren't gonna hurt my feelings. And by the 3rd meeting, because we only had like 5 or 6 meetings left, I was like, see, the time you're all spending prefacing what you're gonna say, like, we like this, but we don't like that part. Like, let's just start there. That's gonna get us to where we wanna be sooner. But those first 3 meetings were how we established trust, and they knew, they were like, okay, he's not gonna take this the wrong way. I can really like say what I think, and it's like that's gonna help all of us arrive at our outcome much faster, the desired outcome.
No, I was just gonna add to that it also becomes really important that the timing of that works. So I've been on both sides of this because we'll have people come to us who are inspired by what we do, and they'll say, I would really love to work with you, and so forth and so on. And then I've also been the one going to a band or a group and saying, I would really love to work with you. And remembering that those first steps have to be really thoughtful. And remembering that they have their whole world that they're navigating to. So a no isn't necessarily always a no, it just might not be possible right now. It's also that if you try to push, you try to sell your idea on, and try to look for subtle ways, invite them to come and experience what you're doing. Chimney Choir is a band that did an amazing job of, first they let us know who we had in common that we knew. What connections in the community do we have in common, so that they weren't just random people coming out of nowhere, which isn't necessarily bad to do. You can be completely unknown to them, but they were, and then they also invited us to a small concert they were having. Again, no pressure to be and then once we got to experience what they were doing, we fell in love with it. And then it was a really easy way to move into a creative process, rather than trying to insist on, we should be doing this because we have this in common, and so we should absolutely do something, and the other organization or the other group or the other individual they might have too much on their plate. They might have too many other balls in the air to be able to engage that at that time.
So how do musicians find their way to all of you? Where is the opportunity for musicians, or do you usually pursue the musicians you want to work with? Does it go both ways? And is there anything musicians can do to generate more opportunity for themselves with folks like you?
There's one of the collaborations that we did at the city of Albuquerque was with a group, a national initiative called Make Music Day. I don't know if they do that here in Denver, but they came, or in Seattle, right? They came to us, and it came by the way of the former Senator Udall's office, so I guess the city felt like they had to do it because the senator said do it, and it ended up on my plate. And I'm a musician, and I was just like, they're never going to want to do this. Everybody's already too busy. People are booked out. The runway is too short. We should do a year's worth of relationship building, yada, yada, yada. My boss wasn't trying to hear that, neither was the mayor. So we had to think on my feet, right? And it was like, well, what if we do a first year that's more of a pilot, and the city's actually going to throw events as opposed to getting musicians in the community to organically create their own events and post them to some site, some clearinghouse or portal. And what I realized through that partnership and that collaboration, because we ended up finding the musicians who actually felt like, yeah, we would love to do that. We know other cities that do that. You guys should have just told us, and we would have organized it. The city could have butted out, which is actually how it's going to happen this year, right? But we needed to seed it and kind of get the community to understand what it was. So our job was to kind of be like, here's a new thing, city's behind it, so that the city can slowly back away from it and let artists do what they do better than government, right? And I remember some of the first, there were 3 interest meetings, and no one came to, no musicians came to. Another one, we were smart enough to engage some other musicians. And they found us, to answer your question more directly, and I say us as the city, which I no longer work for. And then that turned into other opportunities for them, right? And so kind of what Gary's talking about, this courtship phase, where you just invite me to stuff, I'm just inviting you to stuff, right? Maybe I'll ask you out, maybe I won't, right? right? Boundaries, right? But I don't even know if we can work together unless, I kind of see you operate and see how you move in the community. And suffice it to say, I think that for the artists who always wish that the city would do more, which the city can do more. They can always do more. They just have to take it from the police budget. But they can always do more. They can. But to kind of begin to see how the city works, that makes it easier to collaborate with the city, and that kind of learning process of what are the things I need to know in order to work with the city, or to decide if I want to work with them at all. That is where I just think that's how it happened. It kind of, we stuck our flag, people who had a flag like ours came and put their flag next to ours, and then all of a sudden they were on the city's radar. And we watched, and some of them have performed now, it was only a year ago, right? So some of them performed at Summerfest as openers, and so they're getting slowly roped into the machinery of the city, which, you know, notoriously doesn't move fast and has its head in the ground. So the city most times doesn't know what cool music is. They have to be brought to it, and they ain't coming to the club at 11 at night. So these other things create opportunities for them to meet and court.
My answer might be kind of long because I work in music so much, and we're a radio station. But yeah, there's multiple ways to collaborate and be a musician that wants to be more involved with your radio station. And what is so interesting about radio stations nowadays is it's not just like, okay, somebody like comes to the studio, they do a little interview, talk about their new album, maybe sing a song on air or whatever. There's just so much that have developed in radio, especially because of the pandemic. It's like, okay, people aren't driving in their cars anymore, so are they even listening to the radio? What's going on with that? So it's like, okay, as a radio station, how do we get to the audiences who crave music during a time that is so devastating for everybody all across the world? And so it's like, cool, guess we're gonna have to try to delve into video. So that's like a thing that we started to heavily get into during the pandemic. And so we started creating these sessions where people would either come into the studio or virtually do it from their home or from wherever and send us their music, send us their performances. We'll do a virtual interview. So with the pandemic, musicians got to be more creative with us, which I think is really fun and exciting. And so we're building that relationship with each other, like, oh, okay, you don't just like sing for us on air, you're a really good speaker, so you can also like do a panel with us as a radio station where we want to learn more about like the behind the scenes in the music industry. Or if we have a collaboration with like, you know, MCA Denver, it's like, oh, you've already, as a musician, you've already heard your music played on air, you have this relationship built with us on trust already. I trust you as a musician to book you with this collaboration. So I think what's interesting about musicians working with radio stations is they think it's just like, here's my music, play me on air. And it's like, it's not just that. It opens up a whole gateway into future collaborations with the radio station to do other really cool and awesome projects. So when you start to build that rapport and start to establish trust with your radio station, then just know that there are other opportunities to get yourself out there and get yourself exposed and paid as well. So yeah, definitely reach out to your local radio stations. That's like my huge thing if you're a musician, because your local radio stations really want to uplift you. They want to play your stuff. They want to get you seen and heard. They want to help you book shows. And we're one of the first places that you should start.
I would say for Wonderbound specifically, when it comes to the kind of projects that we're doing, one thing that's really important is that if we're going to take on a project with a band, that means that it's going to be an evening-length show, which is a big endeavor. So one thing that's important is, can you make that kind of time commitment? Two, you as a band, what we're looking for, because we have to create an arc for an entire evening, right? And we tell stories. That is kind of our thing. We tell stories. So you have to be a band that has all of it together, right? That you have to have a diversity in your sound that can run the gambit from really intimate to just rock it out, you know, and everything in between, so that we can create those dynamics within an evening. That kind of music that'll work for a single person on stage, and then that kind of music that everybody's out there, you know, so that becomes actually really, that's one of the first things that we look at when, and what we welcome is if you want to send us your stuff, email us, whatever, we'll check it out. We might not be able to answer everybody that sends stuff. Realistically, that can become a big time commitment. But we're always keeping our ear open. We're always looking for new things. So if you send it, give us some time. You're welcome to follow up, but don't press too hard. But at the same time, know that you're putting, and then we're going to look at your whole catalog. We're going to, you send us something, we're going to go online and we're going to find everything about you, right? So because it's a big commitment for us. It's a marriage on a certain level for that period of time. So the subtle things become really important. You've got to show that you know how to handle yourself professionally and know the difference between what it's like to perform in a formal theater as compared to a dive bar. There are different rules that exist for that, and that's fair and good. But know the difference and what that entails, because what we're about is we're trying to put up like top-notch art on the stage. So we are looking for musicians that are at the top of their game, that are ready to bring all themselves to it. Professionals, yes, absolutely.
Excellent. And Kevin, regarding film, where collaborations with musicians are a little bit different, can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, in the last year, one of the new things that we've started to do is we partner with the Silent Film Festival here. So we did live scoring for about 8 different films, and all different kinds of performers came in to produce those unique live scores, which was so cool. It was fun to see a lot of like families out and just a totally different audience than we're used to. And I think that's because you have music so perfectly integrated into the film. We also have more of the traditional sort of format with Film on the Rocks and performers coming up there. And then we have so many special events throughout the year. And so adding that element of music and musical performance is so critical. I think, we certainly, I get a lot of emails about people who want to perform at one of our events. We've got different ways to submit. We've got partners who, bring things to us. We're out there looking. But I would, this kind of goes to your point, but I think some of it is artists recognizing where the organization is coming from. And so to your point, you're looking at something that's a much, longer format. This partnership really needs to be thoughtful. And, for an organization like ours, and I would think a lot of other similar nonprofits, sometimes the events that we're doing, some of those elements are the last thing that we're thinking about. It's, for us, we're thinking about the film, the filmmaker, how do we get the audience, and then it's, oh yeah, we forgot, we need the musical element. And so for artists to, sort of have that part of the conversation of, we'll announce the Film on the Rocks schedule, and then I'll get 1,000 emails about, can I perform at the show? It's like, no, this is done. We've already figured it out. But, again, and that's where I think, going back to the Itch.io conversation, we just started talking. It wasn't about let's do something now. And then as those opportunities came up, it became more fluid. So I think for the artists to sort of understand that most nonprofits are just trying to get through the thing that they're doing, but build that relationship. And so it does go back to having those conversations and knowing, kind of what both sides are going through, and having that sort of that empathy on a daily basis, and being able for the organization to say to an artist, hey, this is not a fit right now, being totally honest, that's okay. And I think to the point that we talked about earlier of no doesn't mean no forever. It might just mean like we have other priorities we have to deal with right now, but we'd love to find something down the road. So.
And I would like to add this. I'd like to break your eardrums. Because you made me think of it differently, and I know I talk with my city hat, not my poet hat. It's flowery hat, it's my poet hat. But when as me as an artist, when I want to collaborate, particularly with musicians, I'm always trying to figure out one of two things. And to your point, Kevin, like if it's more of the gig is the gig, and it's so much bigger than our little part of it, right? And it's like, okay, our job is to do something special, but also to kind of get in, get out of the way. That's a very different kind of collaboration than if I really want to grow myself, so I've had the opportunity to actually do narration for a silent film. We had live music, and some of those things are like, okay, I have a radio background, it's kind of like a podcast or a radio program, but kind of not. In those scariest moments are when I grow, like as an artist. I'm doing something new and outside my wheelhouse. It's not just me standing on stage reading a poem right now. Those skills will serve that part of me if I'm willing to take these risks and try something new. And so it's oftentimes figuring out what kind of, is this more of a collaboration where I'm out front, or is it more of a collaboration where the actual process itself is the thing that's really going to feed me and give me joy? And that's when you can start making decisions about your time, how much you are getting paid. Like, and it goes back to your initial point, Kevin, like what's in it for you? We can say impact, we can say value. What does that really mean? Are we here to learn? Are we here to get more gigs to come out of this? All those are different kind of calculations that we're all kind of subconsciously making before we say yes, but it'd be better if it was have your checklist of things that you know you got to run through in order to make that decision. So.
Yeah, and I think just, impact and intent too on both sides. So like, as an artist, you might say, man, I really need $2,000. So can I just play this gig? I don't even care, what the audience is. Great, but be able to have that conversation. And one of the things for us, especially just going to Film on the Rocks again for a second, we knew that we weren't serving the audience or the artist to the maximum effect. There were certain shows where it was like, this doesn't feel like a concert, it's awkward, we didn't program this correctly, so what do we do? So I went to Youth on Record and sort of had that conversation. How do we help maximize this for the artists and for the audience? Because we need to get ahead of it in terms of programming, but more importantly, how does an artist come in and not just play the show, not just play Red Rocks and that's your one time and that's the thing, but how do you have your Spotify playlist ready? Can people buy merch? What is the way for you to take this to the next level and to use an audience of 8,000 in that sort of format? So those are the kind of things that we're starting to think about to make sure that it does make sense for both sides and just being open throughout that process.
That is really great. I think
there's so many layers to this, right? The one thing that I think about is it's so important to know, regardless of how big the project is, that it might be transformative for you as an artist. Like, the project can transform you. You can come out the other side a completely different artist than you were going in. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to transform your professional life. It's important to know, regardless of how big the organization is that you're working with, I look at it this way, like when we're working with bands and so forth, there's probably of the audience that we gain by working with that band, of who's coming because it's that band and they're fans of that band, we might gain 2 to 5% of their audience that becomes our audience as well. 2 to 5%, and it's about the same going the other direction. Even if they absolutely love the show, they're likely not going to, they're not all going to show up at your next gig. It's just part of the nature of it, so it's just important to know that you're not going to come away with an utterly transformed world in that respect, but it can launch you into a whole nother way of working.
And I think that's why your collaboration with Itch.io is so important as well, because it's about frequency, So the more times that you are collaborating with that organization are more opportunities for people to see you and more opportunities for their audience to get familiar with you as well. And so that's something that we really value at Indie is okay, this artist has been phenomenal. We love them. They're putting out new music. Okay, what else can we do for them? What else can they do for us? How can we continue to build their following and get their stuff out there and foster more collaborations? Hey, we have this artist that did this amazing session. They would be a really good fit for Film on the Rocks because of this, and this. They've already performed at Taste of Colorado or whatever it is. So I also think that frequency and putting yourself out there as much as you can is important as well to help establish oh, I'm an artist that is a professional, that wants to be taken seriously, that wants to get that visibility. And so I really think that when you create a meaningful connection and collaboration with an organization, run with it. And it doesn't just have to be, oh, we're doing this one specific thing. Come to the table with more ideas, and that's just going to continue to get you booked for more gigs.
Can I again? Third round? Third round? We're going to buy everybody a third round. Yes, and so just to the point, and totally anecdotal, I performed with our Philharmonic Symphony folded years ago, and it was Friedrich Rzeszewski, I always say his name's wrong, Attica. It was about the prison riot, and there's this poem that's in it, and it's like the band, the orchestra, the symphony is like behind, and I always like, and that was years ago, and so if I'm out with my son in Target, someone's like, hey, I know you from somewhere. I'm like, what's it gonna be? I'm always like, what's it gonna be? Either there's like the small group of like my like gente people who are super poetry nerds like me, and they're like, you're the poet guy. Everybody else is just like, you're some black guy that lives in Albuquerque. And then there's always one person who's like, yeah, I saw you. You performed on that parking deck with the symphony, and I was like, yeah, yes I did. And to your point, I'm like, that's the audience that wouldn't find me. They found me because they were at that event, and that's the only reason I register, right, in their world. And they're not necessarily going to show up at the next poetry. They're not going to buy a book. But that moment was special to them, special enough for them to remember. And then they follow up with, so yeah, that was really cool. What do you do? And I was like, well, I'm a poet. Which further lets me know they have no clue about the universe of, like, poets are alive? Yes, unlike dinosaurs, living, breathing things. And you know, but it just reminds me that is actually like when you do collaborations, you enter into someone else's consciousness in a way that you probably would not have otherwise. And it's true, just like your Amazon algorithm. You're never gonna find a product based on going to the things you always go to buy. It always takes either a recommendation or some weird mistype of a website that puts you in, you're like, oh wow, this is a thing, people do this. And I'm always like, yeah, that alone should be sufficient enough to make artists want to take the risks to try collaborations, but I will end by saying this, and collaborations begat more collaborations. And so just like you were saying, like bad partners know nothing about you and they're like, oh, we're gonna collaborate, what do you do? Good partners go down your whole rabbit hole they see when you were in your high school musical, and yeah, they see everything, right? But you know that creates this new kind of awareness and consciousness, right? That's there, and yeah, I mean, I feel like that's where it is that leverage of, is it, if I go in expecting to have a brand new audience because I did $8,000, 8,000 person gig, it's like, okay, that's right, that's very unrealistic, but the fact that it only takes one person in that audience to be from a different organization that says, oh, I didn't know he could do that. Like, I'm aware of him, but I didn't know he could do that. Now I'm willing to take a risk and partner with him on my collaboration now. And I feel like that's where it really starts to grow.
Excellent. Can we get a time check real quick? Peter, what time is it?
It's like 1:38.
Okay, great. So two last things. I would love to dive in with all you brilliant people. Ownership rights for musicians and issues around IP. How do you navigate that? And what do you suggest for musicians in terms of developing partnerships and collaborations? What should they be looking out for?
I'll go first, and yeah. So one thing that becomes really important is that you're clear on what that is on the front end. Again, the business side of it is so important, so that you don't get at the other end and like, whoa, what, you know. Every organization has different needs, and depending on what the medium is, what governs that can vary widely. If it's music that's going to be a permanent part of a film, that's a very different thing than a live performance, right? So it's important to be clear about what that is. Our policy is that the artists that create the art, it remains their intellectual property. Then we do a contract that lays out exactly what those usage rights look like. And that goes into not only the live performance part of it. Obviously, if it's the band's music, we need the band there to play it live. But there also might be situations where we need to be able to use recordings, for example, doing shows for kids where we're in schools or whatever. So there'll be rules about if we're doing sections for outreach programs or whatever, that there might be things like that. But everybody's needs are going to be different. So it's making sure that that contract is laid out thoughtfully and clearly, and that you understand it, so that you don't end up at the other end with less than you should have gotten. And that just goes back to making sure that you're okay with what that looks like. And there could be a range of reasons why you might be willing to relinquish some of your rights for other gains. But for the most part, make sure that you care for protecting your intellectual property.
Gary said it all. Ditto. And yes, I like that piece about, what can you live with, right? And another anecdote I have around that is I wrote a poem for our pro soccer team, and I'm a big soccer guy. And I remember talking to the owner, they were like, okay, we want to record the poem, we want to make a video, all things like. My creative partner and I, we advocated to make more money. When those negotiations topped out, we're not going to get any more money than this. You can't get water out of a rock. So this is what we're going to get. But they put substantial other investment in. They hired filmmakers. There was lighting. And they're going to also make sure that a lot of people see this thing. And so all those things are coming into our negotiations. And at the end of the day, the only thing we really ask for is that you get to use it, but we get to use it. I don't want some gag order that says I can't use the thing I wrote at the end of the day, because I'm going to go use it in the classroom in front of some students, and you're going to try to get it to get 1 million views on YouTube. We're using it for different things. And Peter, that's the owner, him and I had a good laugh, because I was also like, Peter, I'm a poet. I don't make a lot of money off what I create at the end of the day. I would rather a lot of people see it. So if you're going to do that for me, then I am willing to, come down off of my price. What we didn't want to happen is we didn't want my demands, if you will, to get in the way of their ability to share it, because that was way more valuable to me than the $2,500 I was getting to write it, right? And so it was like, okay, as far as the brand that is Hakeem, it was like, do you want to be shackled and tied arm in arm with New Mexico United? Yeah, I want to hitch my wagon to this horse. So what are my concessions in order to make this happen?
And also those clauses around whether the organization you're getting involved with, are they allowed to sell their usage rights to somebody else? Could your usage rights end up in the hands of somebody that you do not want those rights in the hands of? So make sure that all those kind of things, what the mediums are that they can use, and what triggers new negotiations. So if something's supposed to be for live performance, but we're looking at putting a film of it out, that should trigger a new negotiation for a new contract for that, unless it's already built in. One thing that's really wonderful that's happening in the performing arts world right now is that the performing arts world is being pushed to be more transparent about how they pay artists and technicians and so forth. I feel like the film world has been out front on being more transparent on that end of things in regard to union wages and so forth. But there's the independent musicians union, and I can't think of the specific name of it, but it's and some of these are there's one based in New York City.
American Federation of Musicians.
Yes, right?
Yeah.
You can go on there and see all of the standard rates for, and you can look at where you kind of land in that, and you can use that as a gauge, just because, and you might be working in a different end of the music industry, but there are things out there that can help you make sure that you're getting a fair shake, and that's important to do that research.
I want to piggyback on that because that's exactly what I want to talk about. I'm kind of dumb and ignorant in the whole rights of musicians kind of thing, but what's interesting about that, and I'm sure a lot of other people share the same thing, is there's a lot of information out there for you to go and learn about that. And so using those resources for a website that might help you dictate, okay, I should talk about this when it comes to my pricing, or this when it comes to a contract. Don't be afraid to negotiate. I think that that's a thing that musicians forget that they have power to do. And if you don't understand something in the contract, don't just sign it. Talk to somebody about it. Especially here in Denver, there's a lot of like lawyers that work pro bono for musicians. Some will be at UMS as well that I have worked with that want to help musicians understand the contracts and the partnerships that they get into and understand their royalties and their rights when it comes to their art. And I think that that's so important for a musician to learn. So whether you're just starting out as a musician or you've been in the industry for like 20 plus years, there's still so much to learn when it comes about what your rights are when it comes to your art. So just ask. And if an organization pushes you on like, well, you don't agree with this or you don't do this thing or whatever, like maybe that's not the right collaboration for you, because a good collaborator would try to help you understand like why there are certain stipulations within your contract. So yeah, just ask. And I would also say your best resources is going to be another musician. Talk to other musicians within your community to understand like, okay, I've worked with this organization before. These are some really helpful tips and what I negotiated in my contract, or here's what was in my contract. I still have it. Keep all of the copies of your contracts so that you can use those as your records. But really your best resources is going to be, you know, the other musicians and the other people around you that can help give you that information and help you make good, smart decisions before you jump into a really intense partnership with an organization.
Excellent. All right. So last big question. What can Youth on Record and UMS do to further support musicians? Where are the collaboration opportunities that are evident to you or that you think would be worth exploring, or where are the opportunities for UMS and Youth on Record and musicians to work together going forward and develop new opportunities?
I'll go again. I've worked with UMS and with Youth on Record for like years. I was like, yeah, this one's my question. I got it. I know things about this. It's so funny, like, I used to work for UMS as the marketing director like years and years and years ago, and I have been saying since like day dot, like when I first got to understand what Youth on Record does for our community, I was like, they should be hosting panels and things like that and educational seminars, and I said it, and it never happened. But it's because, you know, things get busy, things get misconstrued, money, you know, timing, there's just like a bunch of other reasons like why that didn't happen, but I think that doing things like this is so important. So I really hope that Impact Days continues with UMS, and not even just like for UMS, but outside of UMS, because I think that having these informational sessions are so integral to being a musician. They should be year round, you know? Like, I think Youth on Record is such a staple in the music community because they're such a resource for music education no matter what it is. They're not just teaching you like what Ableton is. They're teaching you about licensing. They're teaching you about how to get your music played on the radio. They're teaching you about like, okay, you wanna teach guitar, like here's the best way to maybe start a business, like being a tutor in guitar lessons or something like that. So I think that this partnership that Youth on Record and UMS has started this year is going to be magical. I just want them to continue to do things like this and help connect musicians that may not be in the orbit of Youth on Record, because Youth on Record does specify with like youth coming up in the music industry. But there's so many other ways that like musicians across like spectrums and age groups and things like that can get more involved. And I think these panels and information sessions are so great and so important for them. And it's also a way for musicians to network. That's something that I have really been passionate about working for the radio station these past few years. Is like we have this program that's called the Local 303, which features local musicians on air, but we also throw this party for them once a month that's called the Local 303 Meetup, and it's an opportunity for those musicians to get together and actually talk and hang out. And so many collaborations have come out of those meetups, like they're on each other's tracks, or they're producing each other's songs, or oh, we're on a show together, let's do a festival together. Like, I just think that there's so much to be said about Youth on Record and UMS bringing artists together and getting them to understand more about the industry. That's just so important. So honestly, that's what I would say. Yes.
Yeah, I think continuing to be a connector, so connecting the rest of the community with the artists and making sure that the artists, you know, kind of like the collaboration that we've started, being able to understand what is the gig, who is the group that you're working with, who is the audience, how is this going to benefit you, thinking it all the way through the process and continuing. This is the same thing that we do with a lot of our filmmakers. So, we're bringing in independent filmmakers from all over the world every year that become the Steven Soderberghs, that become some of the big names, the Greta Gerwigs, some of these amazing filmmakers. But being able to continue that relationship so that as the new artists are coming up, they can go to the Flowbots, they can go to some of the acts that have continued to progress in their careers and ask those questions. I know when I talked to Stefan about this, about like, what was your experience in Film on the Rocks, and he basically said to me, it was terrible. And not because it wasn't the coolest thing that he was able to do, he's like, we just didn't know how to maximize it. We didn't know how to manage that kind of audience at that stage in our career. So we were just ill prepared. And did that help build everything afterwards? Absolutely. But now he's able to say, how do we give that same advice to artists that are coming up? And I just think that is that mentorship across the board. And, I think the entire Youth on Record team, they know everybody. So being able to continue to provide those connections to help other organizations understand, like the people, in the last few weeks we've had Neptune come and perform, we've got the Reminders coming back. I mean, some that are just like mind-blowing performances for me. And again, I'm not as integrated into the music scene here, but I'm like, this is amazing. And now these other, audiences that probably wouldn't have had a chance to see them now are going to have that moment too, to be like, oh yeah, I saw you at the top of the parking structure, and that was amazing. So.
It is, you said it, ditto. Said what I was going to say, just about like how can YOR be a broker? Can they be that? And we talked a lot about how you build trust and build relationship and how that takes time. Youth on Record already has those relationships, and so if I'm over here looking to collaborate and I don't get out enough to know who I should collaborate with, I would trust a recommendation from Youth on Record because of everything we just talked about, right? Because they're good partners, and they're not going to send me someone who's not going to be a good partner. They kind of know, they know everybody. They know where all the bodies are buried. So if you don't play good in the sandbox, they're not going to recommend you for these things. And so letting the person who desires the collaboration kind of let Youth on Record curate. I just think that's just a role that they're uniquely suited to do in this community and in this market. Broader than that, yeah, it's like there should be collaboration coaching, like collaboration coaches. There can be, the model right now is a lot of that old school apprenticeship model. Like you ask another artist, can I ride along? I hear you're gonna be writing this big thing. Another friend of mine from the Denver community, some might know Ken Arkine. He's a longtime friend and slam poet, nemesis of Albuquerque. Ooh, Ken Arkine. And then Ken wrote like a poem for the Denver Nuggets, is that the basketball team? The Nuggets. And I remember always just being green with envy. I was always like, man, and in Albuquerque didn't have a pro sports team. We have semi-pro, soccer. We have pro soccer, but not like MLS. We have pro baseball, but not MLB. And so I was like, man, it'd be cool if one day I could do that. And it became true from watching Ken. I was able to ask Ken questions about that partnership. I didn't get to the nitty-gritty of the contract and whether he got paid or not, but I was just like, how did you come up with that? How much information did they or didn't they give you before you produced what you produced that is now on the Jumbotron when Allen Iverson puts his jersey on, right? And instead of being, and this is for the artists, instead of being of a deficit model and saying, oh, I'm jealous and I didn't think he should get that and it's for other people, of course it wouldn't be me, I'm not in Denver. But artists do that. They do that instead of saying, Hakeem, actually, I want to ask you about that. Like, yeah, sure, could they have picked a better poet? Absolutely. But they picked me. And now I have insider information. And I'm happy to share it. And so that is kind of the going model, is like maybe you find an artist who's willing to share, maybe you won't, because there's competition for those opportunities. But it can be less just kind of mercurial and serendipitous, and it could be like very well organized and intentional, and that's what Youth on Record is in a position to create. So.
And I'm just going to say on a more broad level, I think it shows not only the growth of Youth on Record and UMS, but also the growth of Denver as a place for the arts. And that's what drew my wife Dawn and I here to take this job back in all those many years ago. was the possibility for Denver to become a destination for the arts, right? That it's, and I feel like it really is on its way, across every medium, and I think that's an exciting thing. And part of becoming that is becoming responsible for creating a community where people can learn from each other, that people from the outside are coming in knowing that Denver is a place where they're going to find people who are going to be willing to share their thoughts, their ideas, their experience, their failures with each other. And I hope that that's something that remains a part of Denver's identity forever, because it was so obvious to me when I first moved here, and I think it continues to be that, and we just have to all keep working to make sure that stays that way.
I want to say one last thing to that as well. It's like, I've worked in the music industry here in Denver for so long, and I have so many different friends that are artists, and one of the biggest things the thing that always like warms my heart is how everybody always says like, it feels so natural to like come into Denver and like collaborate with somebody, whether that is an artist or an organization, because it feels like they want that. Whereas like when you're in a bigger market like LA or New York, it just feels like you're pulling teeth, you know, you're just kind of throwing things at the wall and seeing like what sticks. Whereas like Denver, they want to discover new talent. They want to figure out ways to put you, to get you showcased in some kind of way. And also the artists themselves, like, yeah, there's competition to some extent, but at the end of the day, everybody's just trying to get to their final goals, you know? So I just think that Denver is just one of those places where it just feels so welcoming to come in as a new artist, that like, you shouldn't be afraid to go out there and just like talk to Youth on Record or come to UMS and meet new people. It's just such great spaces and such great collaborations to have, and yeah, I just hope that that continues to stay here in Denver, because I think that that's what makes us so special too. We're not, it doesn't feel like a popularity contest all the time here, which is so nice. And so yeah, I just love that UMS and that Youth on Record fosters that kind of energy to anybody who is coming into their spaces.
All right, we have the 2-minute warning. So any last words, anyone? Any last words, Kevin?
You know, I think for the artists, one thing that I would suggest is ask questions. And this goes back to your point. You know, no matter who you're working with, other collaborators, other artists, you know, look at the comedian community, and they all travel together, they hang out together, they share jokes, finding more of that openness and collaboration, and you know, just being honest about what your needs are through the process. And that goes the same for organizations, but I think if you can, you're usually doing that with your art. So being able to also do that in your personal life, and it's okay to not know how a contract works. I mean, I don't know all the ins and outs of the legalities around, you know, every film right that's out there. That's okay. I'll ask the questions. So I think just continuing to do that is so important.
I guess I'll just land on the note of, like, don't be afraid to take risk. It's gonna be scary. And put yourself out there. That's the only way because that's how you grow, that's how you will discover capacities that you didn't know you had, is to do things that are gonna push you outside your comfort zone.
I would say for me specifically, I was not very outgoing when I first started in the music industry. I was very nervous, and like I said, I'm neurodivergent. And I think going to like my first event alone and just like talking to people, just putting myself out there, people, we're all nervous. We're all just trying to do our own thing, but like I think just through taking a risk and through just going and putting yourself out there in whatever situation, people respect that. And I think that whether you're a musician that's just starting out or you've been in the industry for a while, the more you continue to just put yourself out there and just continue to like try to push yourself in general, you'll see the rewards, because there are so many musicians out there that have struggled to get their music out or have tried to get certain collaborations, and it's just like, what's going on? What am I doing wrong? And it's just like, just continue to talk to people. Just continue to talk to artists and talk to people in the music industry, whether they're a musician or, you know, radio host or like whatever. Like, just keep doing it, keep going. It feels exhausting, but we're all in it together, and we understand where you're coming from. So just keep pushing yourself.
I didn't know what I wanted to say. I feel like, as a poet, I often talk to other poets about this phenomenon of what we do. Performance poets, not just poets who only publish, but it's crazy because our art form is, in the social imagination, a thing that loners tend to do, which is true. Like, you write alone. You write at 2 a.m. after you put the baby down. You write whenever you can find breaks in the middle of your day. You're very much alone when you're creating the content, but you're always creating it for someone else. You're creating with an audience in mind. And oftentimes it isn't until you get on the stage or you're at the performance and now what you do is in the round all of a sudden, and it's not just in your head. And those are the moments where, the risky moments where magic can happen. Like, you don't get invited to a collaboration if you never share any of your work. Like, I have to know something about you to even be inclined to desire collaboration. And so I just say that to the artists who are watching and gonna be watching and in the room, like, that's the trade-off. That is the gamble, that's the gambit. But it gets easier. It's a muscle you can develop over time, and as the resume begins to grow of collaborations, you get invited to more, and it's one of those things that you can only learn it by doing, and you gotta start somewhere.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Hakeem. Thank you, Demi. Thank you, Garrett. Thank you, Kevin. You all are fabulous. Really great.